Interesting and practical examples and advice on how to make that dollar stretch further, which is really, at the heart of what we're trying to discover here, using all the new media tools and that we've been discussing today, plus some of the traditional ones. And I think we'll have some interesting and hopefully stimulating points of view on that. So we're going to be just discussing the down ballot conundrum, which is really about, can we downscale some of the techniques that some of the larger campaigns are using to target, voters and in a much more local and smaller sense. Can they be applied? Can they not be applied? What's available to those smaller campaigns today? So to my left, I've got four experts in their fields. I'd just quickly ask each in turn, James, if you'd lead off, just tell us a little bit about what you're working on now and what excites you in what you're doing.
Sure. So my name is James Barnes. I'm a client solutions manager at Facebook on our elections team, and I work with elected officials and politicians on the Republican side all the way from city council races to President of the United States to help use our platform to help win elections, raise money, convince people. And it's such an enormously exciting time to be at Facebook and this space in general, as the rise of mobile and identity and addressability allows us to reach people where they are across devices with messages they care about, regardless of kind of what the size of the race is or what the budget is. So I'm really excited to talk a little bit about how we're doing that, what our point of view is, our philosophy, and talk a little bit with these folks about their opinions too.
Hi, I'm Jonathan Lichter, Chief Strategy Officer, Kelly Scott Madison in Chicago. We are a consumer media planning and buying company, also specialize in analytics and promotions. We generally work with candidates and ballot issues and advocacy groups who don't have a lot of money. They're going to be outspent by the opposition, and they come to us to apply consumer-centric media strategies to their campaigns to outsmart the competition that they have.
My name is Mike Liddell. I'm the GM of Digital at NGP Van. And NGP Van is a software company that works with campaigns and nonprofits, and we provide software up and down the ballot. So we worked with the Obama campaign in both races that he won. We're also working with both the Clinton campaign and the Sanders campaign. We work exclusively on the Democratic side. But we also work all the way down the ballot. So we work with folks who are running for state rep and city council and things like that as well. And like other folks said, I'm definitely excited to talk about, some of the things that we're working on, including how to integrate a lot of the digital media data and targeting into kind of some of our core tools that campaigns are using day in and day out to figure out who to talk to and which voters to convince to vote for them.
Good afternoon. I'm Michael O'Brien. I'm the head of sales for the broadcast division at the EW Scripps Company. We have 33 TV stations in 24 markets, comprised in Florida, Ohio, Wisconsin, Colorado, Nevada, Arizona. And I work with our broadcast team and our digital team, working with candidates from president all the way down to city council across our markets.
Great, thank you guys. So you can see a breadth of experience across whole range of different platforms. And I'd like to really start with Mike right on the far left there, because I'd like to dive straight into TV, poor old TV. We just heard today how digital is playing catch up rapidly, 2020, although looming. It's not what it used to be, is it, TV? Especially, it's expensive, especially for our guys in our smaller campaigns. New generations are skipping past ads anyway. Everyone's on mobile now, right? So isn't that where smaller campaigns should be focusing their efforts in social and mobile, etc., rather than TV?
It's a loaded question. I think first, I'll take care of it in pieces. I think first when you talk about the expense of TV, when you get into a presidential market like we're in now, when you look at a model like New Hampshire, it's thrown way out of whack, right? And the stations up there are trying to keep pricing themselves out of it, and people just keep buying it, right? So it does throw the CPM analysis and the cost per point analysis way out of whack. But in a normal marketplace, in a normal political cycle that's not super saturated, when you look at the cost analysis on a cost per voter on broadcast TV, it is in the cents compared to in the dollars or tens of dollars when you look at mobile and digital and cable and outdoor and mail when you compare it across the board. But that's not reality always, right? So when you go into a year like 2016 in the back half, when you look at a North Carolina or an Ohio or a Pennsylvania or Florida where it's going to be super saturated, there are pockets, right, that the down ballot candidates can go to. And the important part is to know the rules, and to the point on the previous presentation, to know the races. You go into a market like Tennessee for 2016, it's going to be crickets. The city councilman, the state legislature, the state senator, they can afford TV without a problem. So it's about knowing the rules and the heat map, if you will, in those marketplaces. Because once a station accepts that race, all the rules apply. So if it's a state legislator or if it's a U.S. president, they have right to the lowest unit rate set on a TV station set by the most favored advertiser. So I think when you get to those down ballot races and those down ballot agencies, it's very important to understand the rules that the TV stations have to play by, because if you're outside one of those super saturated markets, TV is still very affordable. As far as the usage, tablet penetration's at an all-time high, smartphone penetration's at an all-time high. SVOD is growing rapidly, but if you look at the numbers, the constant of minutes per day on TV is relatively the same as it's been when VCRs popped up and everything else. And I think Nielsen just put the study out this week that had that younger demographic that we're talking about with these down ballot races. Is there's still 78% of them, I think it's just a little bit more than 75% of them are still watching TV, broadcast TV, live broadcast TV in the same week. About 50% of them will watch a local newscast. A third of them will rely on social, which I know we're going to get to as well, and social does play a big part into our strategy. So when I mentioned on the intro, our local teams and our political team here, making sure we have that social piece to run in partnership or congruent with our broadcast piece is very important, because it is a factor. But I guess throughout the day, broadcast is still the big share of the market, but there is an effective way to use the two together, and TV has an impression.
It's augmentive. We're not talking blacksmiths in the age of the motor car here. It's augmentive. You see TV as part of an overall package for the down ballot in particular.
Absolutely. Like I said, outside of those super saturated markets, and you play by the rules, broadcast TV is still very effective. And even if you look at the amount of political in those odd years, a lot of that are local races, down ballot races, right, that still take advantage of broadcast television.
Any of you other guys got a view on the role of TV and for the down ballot candidates, the smaller races?
Yeah, I think what Michael said is very important. It's understanding the rules. And this has been said today a couple times, non-candidate money is growing faster than inventory. So these down ballot candidates, they qualify for lowest unit rate, and it's understanding the media market relative to the precinct or district or geography that your voter is in. And there are going to be many markets where television is not only affordable, but it's going to be the umbrella to build a comprehensive campaign for these down ballot candidates.
Yeah, so like a few months ago, Targeted Victory, which is one of the largest agencies on the right, did a study with Google. They called 50 States of Waste. Did anybody see that?
Yes.
Yeah. And we're talking about down ballot races, which I would consider the upper bound here probably to be congressional races in maybe really small states. And what they found in that study, and this doesn't make TV irrelevant, it's just a really hard fact of life, is that 75% of money that's spent on broadcast television in DMAs across the country is wasted going to people who can't vote for them. So I think as we sit here and talk a little bit about how we address voters and how we use these fantastic techniques, I'm sure we've been talking all day to get in front of people, we know that sort of the alternative, which is spending money on broadcast television regardless of the expense of the market, is hitting a whole lot of people who can't vote for people. So I think that's important to note.
So back to that point earlier about knowing which half of your advertising is effective and which half isn't. But, you know, I think when you talk about these rules, some specifics, can you help me with some specifics there about what the rules one should look out for if planning and working with TV?
Jonathan, you want to go first? Or broadcast television stations are bound by a set of rules by the FCC. First and foremost, each legally qualified candidate running on a TV station has the right to the lowest unit rate per class of time on that TV station. By rule, though, each class of time is set by each regular most favored advertiser. So when you have an annual deal by one of the big 3 domestic auto dealers, they will place their, or not place, but necessarily, but negotiate their media spend for the year with the TV station. Those are the rates that are going to set the LUR for each week during the year. So as you go through a political cycle and you enter the 45-day window before a primary and the 60-day window before a general election, all those rules come into play. So you have the right, and the decision is yours at the campaign or at the political agency. It is your decision on what level to buy. Stations will operate on immediately preemptible. They will operate on a preemptible with notice, and every station, every operator is different on their definitions of how they operate inside their TV station. But at the end of the day, it is the campaign's decision on what level of protection or what class of time they want to purchase. And they have the right by law to get the lowest unit rate in that class of time. The other piece to know is equal access. Whether or not you're well-funded or your opposition is well-funded, once your opposition goes on the air, they can trigger an equal access claim within 7 days. So no matter what the inventory sellout situation is, you have the right to go in and make that claim and have access to that TV station's airtime regardless of their sellout levels. And we saw that a lot with the SNL skits all this year, because even though they weren't in specifically in a 45-day primary window for New Hampshire or Iowa, the campaign was deemed in full swing. So once Trump and Hillary Clinton both went on Saturday Night Live, every other candidate they were running against were triggered an equal access opportunity on the other NBC stations in those markets. So there's a couple nuances to those two parts of the rule that are very important when you go in as whether a well-funded candidate or an underfunded candidate.
And that's critical, really. That knowledge is gold dust for small campaigns, right?
Right, and the lowest unit rates or the political rate card is set in September? Or?
Yes, it is set during the course of the year because of the flow of normal businesses, and stations can tweak it a little bit as normal business progresses, but usually once they're set and once a candidate buys the first time, it's usually very little changes throughout the end of the election cycle unless there's a small rebate or something, but usually they're set out front pretty early.
Right, and then in order for that lowest unit rate to go up, all the traditional advertisers who have annual buys in there would have to be preempted to start lifting that lowest unit rate. Right. So, you know, there's wise ways to negotiate, and there are ways that make it a little bit easier where you won't have preemptions. But if you're looking at an underfunded campaign or a down ballot candidate, the strategy that you employ are to always use lowest unit rate and work hard to keep that inventory in.
Very interesting. Did you have a point?
Well, you know, the only thing I would just add to that is, and I think it's important for us to really understand, you know, what we mean by local races. And this discussion kind of highlights that, you know, if you are a truly local race where you're running for a very small district, you know, if you're running for city council in a town that maybe none of us would have heard of before, you know, these sorts of rules actually make it prohibitive for one of those races to really run something like TV ads, and where if you look at some of the digital options that are available, a person can actually just go online and buy something. So I think for the very small local races, TV is probably still, both prohibitively expensive, but also, something that requires a level of sophistication that some of those campaigns may not have. Whereas digital does offer, some ease of access to get into those things, even separate from kind of the cost efficiency arguments. But we would definitely argue that whether you're doing TV or digital or direct mail or knocking on doors, the important thing is to understand where the voters that you're trying to reach are, and if you're trying to reach a population that is over 70 and predominantly African American, they may be on a different set of media than someone who is 25 and
depends who you want to reach.
Exactly.
Yeah. I mean, on that, I was just sort of wanted to dig into, pivot slightly and move into then the role of social, either alongside or as well as TV or instead of TV. James, you described very well to us what you're doing there at Facebook, and we've heard a lot about Facebook today being, obviously the sort of predominant source of data really in social media. Your belief is that, with better media targeting and analysis today, identity, addressability, the barriers, as Mike was just saying, are coming right down to reach the right people. There's no need for great big, expensive and fancy data engines. There are a lot more accessible ways of reaching people. How is that happening? I mean, particularly from the Facebook dimension.
Yeah, so it's super exciting. I'll talk about three things that I think are really interesting here. One is just that I think, when you come to a conference like this, you talk a lot about measurement and analytics and targeting and understanding how are you moving people to do what, right? And that has always been in the DNA, probably even more so than national races of local races, right? If you're a student of political science, you've probably read the Green and Gerber experiments, Get Out the Vote, almost every single field experiment that's been published in political science journals, proving that media works regardless of its mail, phones, door knocks, yard signs, digital, et cetera, has been on local races. And so this is a place where they do those things because they legitimately don't have money to waste, and so they want to test to make sure that what they're doing is correct, right? And so this means that local races are the places where addressability matters the most. The fact that you know who you're targeting and you know that you're targeting them with the right message. So for local races throughout the past, in order to do this, it was, beyond television, it's prohibitively expensive to pay $5 per voter, for instance, for a mail piece, and then to follow up with that. And to get volunteers out into the field. All things you have to do to run a campaign, but certainly if you're small, underfunded, running for a city council race, you have your family and friends around you, and they're the people who support you. It's just not an option, right? And so the options there were, spend this really expensive money to know who you're hitting, but to spend a lot of money on production and mail and all of those sort of like physical costs, capital, right? Or to go on television, which is, as we've talked about, is just really not an option. So the idea that we can now put sound, sight, and motion in front of people on a digital platform, on their phones, right, where they're spending a ton of their time, increasing amounts of their time, right? On Facebook, where people, 2/3 of the American people are spending 2/3 of their time there. That's really, I think, an awesome thing. And so you mentioned the sort of the points that I brought up sort of in our prep, which were addressability and identity, and those two things are sort of hand in hand, but I'll go into both of them, right? When you have a platform like Facebook and others where people have identities that they own, right, on smartphones that have sophisticated location tracking technology, and that those go across their both desktop and mobile devices, you now have the ability to reach those people wherever they are and to know where they live. And that's super important. So when you're in a city council race, or when you're voting for your alderman, you know that in these zip codes, and we'll get to sort of how we do voter file targeting in a second, that you're reaching the right people. And you're doing that at exceptionally low CPMs compared to other options. Secondly, and I think probably lots of folks have talked about this today, even if you're not using sort of native location targeting on a platform, the ability to take your voter files, which especially on a local campaign is the bread and butter of your campaign, upload it regardless of whether it's email address, phone number, postal address, etc. To Facebook or similar platforms, and to be able to know not only are you hitting people right in the right places, but you're also hitting them on the messages that they care about. So maybe if you have micro-targeting data, maybe if you're a little bit more sophisticated, then you can hit people with those right messages. If you don't, then you can maybe overlay some things that Facebook knows about them. That's super important. And then I think third, to that point, right, when you're not talking about location or you're talking about voter files, when you can use the vast amount of data that somebody like Facebook has collected to model what somebody's ideology is and to figure out things that you wouldn't have even known without the time that they spend, that's really important. So we're coming upon a time, right, where even when people are watching television, which they still are watching in great measure, right, and even when people are living their lives and they're going to the grocery store, they have these phones in their heads, and those phones are their identity, and they are who they are. And you have lots and lots of tools to reach them at the most granular level with the messages they care about. I think that's super exciting. So I'm really excited, to watch the rise of mobile and video, and adhering to this idea that people are who they are wherever they are rise. And that's exciting. I would also point out. It's a really good timing for this panel because as of tomorrow, we will open up Facebook location-backed congressional district targeting on Facebook, which I think a lot of people have been asking for a long time. So I'm really excited to see how people do that.
Just on that, I mean, you talk. I mean, it feels to me. I've heard some of the comments today about being data-rich, content poor. Lindsay Conwell from Google mentioned that in this field in particular. Is there I'm going to sort of talk about content a little bit because it is a sense to me that there's the pipes are all there, but we're starved a little bit of content. We talked earlier about, just not enough content to this voracious media engine that we now have, and all the different variations it takes. Is there anybody got a view on content, the kind of content that people want to spend time with, particularly on mobile, particularly? How does it cross from mobile to TV, etc.? Cross-platform content too.
A few things. I think one important thing, right, is just the idea of reach, right? So whatever content you have, which should be good, and I'll get into that a little bit, the idea that it's reaching the right people and that not 75% of it is going to the wrong place is super powerful. Secondly, we have this sort of notion at Facebook we refer to as the 3-second audition, right? The nature of media consumption, regardless of whether it's a down-ballot base or the presidential race is changing. And so when you are scrolling through your newsfeed and you're seeing photos of your niece and people's dogs and engagements and all these happy things about life, it actually takes a really compelling reason for you to stop. Right? And so we refer to content that is thumb stopping, right? That exists in an autoplay environment, is really compelling, makes people stop and watch as sort of the goal that everybody should be striving towards. And that's not easy all the time, right? To stand out in this really competitive environment. So it does make, as you make investments in figuring out, how you're micro-targeting folks or sort of like what message should go to whom, you have to have those messages to deliver. And those messages have to be delivered in a compelling way. We're seeing folks do lots of really cool experiments, both in the political and non-political realms. I know WPP specifically has made a huge investment in how they develop content, and I think that's starting to pay off. Has anybody seen, there was a really, really cool Jameson ad that was on Facebook and Instagram that sort of like looked like it was fake 3D, kind of driving across the screen? Yeah, we released this case study on that, both on reaction and resonant, like the three sort of measurement pillars we look at. It just killed it. It was amazing. And so we see people looking at things like that from corporate America, and then folks, from political campaigns kind of interchanging those ideas and realizing that in this new world where there's all this new sort of content, really the sky's the limit. We see folks experimenting with really cool delivery of text, so you don't even have to listen to audio, knowing that most people, even if they slow down, don't listen to audio. But you're absolutely right? If you're going to be spending all this time doing segmentation, even if you're reaching the right people, you need to be reaching them with the right message, and you certainly don't want to be ignoring how you're delivering it.
I mean, I think content's a huge area. Mike, do you want to comment on that?
I would say the same thing. I mean, I think that's, a big challenge facing a lot of campaigns is how to, produce really good content, produce really good ads. And I think we haven't yet seen on digital something equivalent to, something like LBJ's Daisy ad, which is, political people know is a famous ad from back during that race that featured a mushroom cloud and really changed the, the dynamics of the race. we haven't really seen that sort of thing, happen with digital advertising yet, where you've had an ad that's really had like that sort of impact on a race. And it may be that this cycle is going to be the cycle when something like that will happen. But I think that's going to be really interesting, is once we start to see some of the really creative minds who are coming up with these ads starting to think digital first, if we're going to get some really amazing content that will have huge impacts in that respect.
Sure. Just a question to Jonathan. I mean, our topic here is really about how smaller campaigns can use all of the tools at their disposal. How can they outsmart when they can't outspend? What advice would you have for those smaller campaigns, and what could they learn from the successes and maybe failures of the larger campaigns and races?
Okay. Well, there are a lot of questions inherent in that. The first aspect is there are different types of local campaigns, whether it's a congressional race or an alderman, and you have to understand what it is you're trying to accomplish first and foremost. Sometimes it's just name recognition. So there was a joke about yard signs this morning, and yet if you're in a very hyper-local race and you need name recognition, probably the first most cost-effective place you'd go is yard signs. So, and maybe you then go to social and target that. The most important aspect is to have a short, mid, and long-term objective of what you're trying to accomplish. A lot of campaigns just want to throw media out there. I have to be on TV. I can't afford TV. I have to do this. But you should set short, mid, and long-term goals of how that campaign's going to evolve. And then you have to understand what the opposition is doing first and foremost, if there is opposition. Sometimes it's just getting name recognition. And then the yard signs, and we joke about yard signs. Yard signs are highly effective in these very local races. I think we can learn probably more what not to do from large campaigns. And obviously, spending the most money doesn't get you the most results. So it really doesn't matter how small your budget is, it has to be relevant. If you're doing something on social, make sure it's affordable. So in terms of layering data, a lot of data on a campaign, maybe you need to go in at the entry level with the budget that you have. That's okay, because it's still more cost effective than pushing out a TV spot that goes to a whole DMA, or possibly even a TV spot that goes to a local cable system. So you have to answer all these questions. There isn't a one-size-fits-all. Every situation is unique. And when you start that campaign, it's important to get everybody together to say, what is it we're trying to accomplish, no matter how small it is, and how do we measure success? And you go from there.
How does we heard a lot today as well about context and knowing context, understanding context, a big topic in the media world, I know. How can smaller campaigns, I also was fascinated to hear about how, understanding where people are and their intentions, is shaping even walk plans on that hyper-local level. How can local campaigns leverage this new or greater and deeper understanding of understanding where people are? I don't know if any of you would want to take that.
I can. Yeah, I think that. I think right. Like one of the biggest advantages that a local campaign has, regardless of where they're buying media, is that they're closer to their electorate. Right. So if you're running to be the alderman of sort of like your few blocks around you, your neighborhood, you obviously know sort of what's on folks' minds, right? And kind of having that just nuance that can't come from data, right? Having just that visceral understanding of an electorate is a really big advantage. And then being able to apply that into the field, I think, is really important.
I think also one thing to remember is you got to have a good candidate. Right.
As a basic.
The 3 o'clock panel, I caught the 3 o'clock panel and they were talking about how much money Jeb Bush and his super PAC has spent. What did it get him? Nothing. Is Jeb Bush really a good candidate? Right? So I think that's number one, but to James' point, on the local campaigns, it is the right mix, and to what Jonathan also said, the right mix and where you have to be, whether it is on the ground or on a sign or in a program, whether, the waste or not, if you have the right program and you have the right audience, it's going to move the needle for you. It does it for plumbers, social and on TV, it does it for roofers, it does it for window guys, it does it for politicians. If you hit them where they are, where they need to be on the social and the digital platform, which we do, and you hit them in the right programs during the right time of day to get the right audience, it works in tandem.
So yeah, Mike Liddell, the notion of being hyper-local, how can small campaigns, use digital and data and the data they have to really gain advantage at that level? Even, how do you sort of almost, is it possible to run a sort of 24/7 mini media operation at that hyper-local level?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I think that, especially at the hyper-local level, when we're really talking about, some of these smaller universes, a lot of the more sophisticated targeting and understanding, context and, being able to slice and dice the data in all these different ways isn't necessarily as useful, because you do all that and you realize there's 5 people in the segment, and it's just as cost efficient to go knock on their door as it is to run ads at them.
Segment of 5.
Yeah, exactly. I think that a lot of, the really important targeting in terms of digital for these local campaigns is geo-targeting and just being able to target within your district. And then after that, a lot of it kind of goes over from more being able to be digital targeting and more getting into the universe of just understanding who your electorate is, being able to go and actually go out and knock on doors and talk to those people, and having that sort of understanding that James was talking about earlier is really going to be the most useful thing. And you could definitely see some campaigns getting tripped up on almost the plethora of options that they have and all this data, and it becomes almost overwhelming. And at the end of the day, there's some really simple things that they should concentrate on doing first. Get the basics down, and that is the most effective thing, instead of really getting into this crazy level of
It's almost like an embarrassment of riches. So many choices. One could be startled by the sheer quantity of of that.
Exactly, and all that is not really nearly as effective as going and knocking on someone's door, or getting a volunteer to go talk to their neighbors and that sort of thing, which is really what a lot of local campaigning has really been built on. And our point of view is definitely that those things should all be kind of in sync, and that you should be putting data from a door that you knock on into a database and tracking that, but also tracking the targeted ads that you're running at those same people as well, and being able to look at that holistically.
To your point, I think we ask the question a lot, like, is it better to have sort of like 10 impressions of one message or 1 impression of 10 messages? It's obviously better to have 10 impressions of one message, right? Like, getting into these saturated markets, as they often are, with a clear understanding to voters of who you are, and being able to do that in a reliable way is far more important than trying to understand how you divide 10 people with what they specifically want.
Right, you're going to have, for most of these campaigns that are hyper-local, one piece of copy, one message.
Sure.
And that's normal. And we talk a lot about reach, and the point was made, and it's a very good point. You can get 100% reach by knocking on a door in one weekend. And so, and that's a very low CPM.
Yeah. I think that's good. Yeah. And talking about reach, I just wanted to mention a word that has only been mentioned once on this panel, and that's the word Trump. And I wanted to just bring that up, because just to sort of throw it in there as a little bomb, really. I think it's fascinating to watch what's happening there. I think it's caught many people by surprise. Certainly being British, there's a kind of utter fascination with it. And I just desperately want to know, from the sort of efficiency, you mentioned, Michael, about Jeb Bush and the inefficiency. What's the efficiency driving the Trump effort? I mean, I know there's a there's a whole bunch of reasons, but if there's anything, I would like each of you to respond in turn, maybe starting at the far left, to that, if there's a point you have on that phenomenon.
What's he up to? About 250 free news hits a week, right? It's a change, right? It's just something new. He's not a typical politician. I think that's just got everybody's attention nationally. But he hasn't won anything yet.
True.
Right? So I look at what he's doing, and he's pledged he was going to spend money, and he spent a little bit of money. And if he wins the nomination, I think he will make a liar out of every one of us who think we're in the political business at all. But I think at the end of the day, to win a presidential election national, what he's doing now won't carry. I think he's going to have to invest in a ground force and a media plan across the 10 states. I don't think it's sustainable to go into 10 states and do what he's doing now.
Oh, to Jonathan's point, though, he has a simple message, right? He's got the basics.
Very true. Yeah, I mean, you know, we work with the Democratic side of the House, so I will not pretend to understand what's going on with the Republican primary or Trump. But I do think that, you know, that actually both Trump as well as the Sanders campaign are both kind of, and to a certain extent Ted Cruz are examples of, you know, campaigns that are running a different playbook than, you know, has traditionally been used, and are using some different techniques and different strategies to kind of reach out to people. And it's interesting to see what's working and what isn't. And I think we are kind of going through a bit of a change in some of the traditional you know, political techniques that have been used in the past, and it'll be interesting to see what works and what doesn't long term, and who actually gets elected, and which of these kind of techniques we end up picking up and using as part of the standard political playbook, and even as it relates to local campaigns, whether or not any of these, you know, techniques will kind of trickle down. You know, a lot of what Trump is doing is not necessarily something that would, you know, that requires a big campaign infrastructure to do. You know, anyone can get on Twitter and say crazy things and get attention, and honestly, that could be a tactic for a local campaign, is to you know, to do that sort of thing, and that would be a cheap way to potentially run a campaign. So, you know, but maybe not effective. So it'll be interesting to see how it all turns out.
Yeah, I think I agree with what everyone said, and it really demonstrates the power of earned media versus paid media. And you know, I haven't heard a lot of talk about that today, but there are things that you want to pay for, and there are things that you don't want to pay for. And content is so important, and if you spend a lot of money and run the common political ad that doesn't stand out, it's very hard to get value out of that money, let alone whether you have a good candidate or not, because that content helps form the brand for that candidate. So, you know, we'll see what happens, because it's still unknown. But I thought he was just lucky at first, and I think there's a big plan there, and it's something that everyone can learn from. And the power of social media. We did a study in our company. People under 55, the two things they look for being informed politically: TV ads and social media. So very powerful, and there's earned social media, and then there's social media you pay for. And so it's just, I think it's a really good lesson.
James?
Yeah, so like Mike, you know, I spend my time as a platform sort of supporting everyone, so I try to avoid publicly prognosticating on who's going to win or lose. But I think when you look sort of at the playbook that Trump is running specifically on Facebook, right, I think there's a lot of things that a lot of folks can learn, right? Does anybody know the average length of one of Donald Trump's videos that he posts? It's not average, it's exact. It's 14 seconds, right? So they're obviously paying attention to what works and what doesn't work, and they're talking, and he is talking directed to his electorate in very short, digestible clips that people are sort of watching. And so I think there's a lot that a lot of candidates can learn about the value of having a platform that sort of democratizes this communication with a small d, and that you can talk directly to your voters and they can talk back to you, and you can make that a part of both your earned and paid strategies, right? You can engage in the comments, you can talk more deliberately, you can avoid a lot of the sort of stilted speech-ready things that people tend to go through 5 levels of approval before they post. You can be your real self, and that can actually be an advantage because you connect with people on a level that press releases don't. So I think that's a really important lesson for candidates of all levels to run. I've had relatives that run for state representative, and they want to post on Facebook this paragraph they edited for like 7 years, and you're like, people just want to hear what you have to say, right? And that's a really important thing, and I think that's something that Donald Trump has gotten right.
So humanity and authenticity came up a lot today, right? Are we out of time?
We should go. We should
get
see
some
if there are
questions.
any audience questions.
Thank you, guys.